The auction block in Charleston, South Carolina, 1859. A young man stood shackled, barely 20 years old, eyes hollow with grief. The auctioneer started the bidding at $50. No one moved. $40. Silence. 30-20. The crowd looked away. Finally, a widow in black raised her hand. 17 cents on the dollar. Take it or leave it. She bought him for $8.50, the price of a lame horse. His name was Samuel. And what she discovered about who he had been married to would shake her understanding of everything she thought she knew about slavery. Charleston, 1859. The city gleamed with wealth built on cotton and human misery. Church steeples pierced the sky while auction houses sold human beings 6 days a week. Into this world of contradiction walked Margaret Ashford, a widow of 52, recently arrived from her plantation in the Carolina backcountry after her husband's death 6 months prior. Margaret had inherited 300 acres, 12 slaves, and debts she hadn't known existed. Her husband, Thomas Ashford, had been a poor manager who drank away profits and borrowed against future harvests. Now Margaret was alone with land she couldn't work and obligations she couldn't meet. She'd come to Charleston to sell what she could and buy what she must. She needed field hands, but her purse held only $60. Barely enough for one healthy worker. The auction house on Chalmers Street smelled of fear and desperation. Human beings stood on wooden platforms while white men examined their teeth, felt their muscles, checked for scars that might indicate a rebellious nature. Margaret had been to slave auctions before, always with her husband, always looking away at the crucial moments. But today she couldn't afford the luxury of squeamishness. She watched as strong men went for $200, $300. Women with children went for less. Nobody wanted the complication. Then they brought out Samuel, even from the back of the room. Margaret could see something was wrong with him. He was young, early 20s at most, with a slender build that suggested he hadn't been used for heavy field work. His clothes were finer than typical slave clothing, though now dirty and torn. But it was his eyes that marked him as damaged goods. They were empty. Not defiant, not fearful, just absent, like he was already dead inside. The auctioneer, a red-faced man named Pritchard, who Margaret's husband had dealt with before, tried his best. Fine house servant, educated, can read and write, though you might want to beat that out of him. Came from the Beaumont estate up in Virginia. Clean bill of health, no marks, good teeth. The crowd barely listened. Reading and writing made slaves dangerous. The Virginia origin raised questions about why he'd been sold south, and those dead eyes suggested broken spirit, or worse, active suicidal tendencies. No one wanted a slave who'd hang himself first night and waste the investment. Pritchard started at $50. The silence was absolute. He dropped to 40, 30, 20. Margaret saw his frustration growing. At $15, he was about to pull Samuel off the block and send him to the holding pens when Margaret surprised herself by speaking. 17 cents on the dollar, every head turned. 17 cents on the dollar was an insult, suggesting the merchandise was worth almost nothing. It meant $8.50 for a human being. Less than a good pair of boots. Pritchard's face went purple. Madam, I cannot possibly. Then don't. Margaret kept her voice steady. But I see no other offers, and I suspect you're under instructions to clear inventory today. $8.50 in cash, right now, or I walk away and you're stuck feeding him another week. The silence stretched. Finally, Pritchard spat tobacco juice and nodded, done. And good riddance. Margaret paid, received the bill of sale, and approached Samuel on the platform. Up close, she could see he was even younger than she'd thought, maybe 19. His hands were smooth, not coal-used from field work. His face, beneath the grime, had refined features. And those eyes, God help her, those eyes looked right through her like she wasn't there. Can you walk? She asked. He nodded once. Then follow me. She'd rented a room at a boarding house on Meeting Street, respectable but cheap. The landlady had a stable out back where slaves could be kept overnight. Margaret led Samuel there, past the curious stares of other boarders. Once in the stable, she removed his shackles, something that clearly surprised him based on the slight widening of his eyes. I'm going to ask you questions, Margaret said. If you answer truthfully, we'll get along fine. Lie to me, and I'll sell you to the rice plantations where you'll be dead in a year. Understood? Yes, ma'am. His voice was cultured, educated. Whatever he'd been before, it wasn't a field hand. Why were you sold? Silence. Samuel, I paid $8 for you. At that price, I deserve to know if you're diseased, criminal, or insane. My wife died. The words came out flat, emotionless. 3 weeks ago, I tried to kill the master who owned her. I failed. He sold me south. Margaret's blood went cold. A slave who'd attacked a white man should have been hanged or at minimum, brutally punished and sold to the worst conditions available. The fact that he'd only been sold south suggested complications she didn't understand. Why did you attack him? Because he killed her. Now emotion crept into Samuel's voice. Raw pain, not with his hands, but he killed her as surely as if he'd put a knife in her heart. I don't understand. Samuel looked at her directly for the first time. Ma'am, you asked for truth. The truth is complicated and ugly and will likely make you regret buying me. Are you certain you want to hear it? Margaret should have said no, should have locked him in the stable and figured out how to resell him in the morning. But something in his eyes, the first real emotion she'd seen there, made her curious. Tell me. Samuel sat on a hay bale. I was born at Beaumont Hall in Virginia. House slave, son of the cook. Master Beaumont was third-generation plantation owner. Educated at William and Mary, considered himself enlightened. He had theories about slavery, about improving the race through education and proper treatment. He selected certain slaves for special education. I was one of them. He taught you to read and write. He taught me Greek and Latin, philosophy, mathematics. I read Plato and Aristotle in the original languages by the time I was 14. He was conducting an experiment, you see. Could slaves be educated like white men? Could they reach the same intellectual heights if given the same opportunities? Margaret's mind reeled. She'd heard of such things. Eccentric masters who educated slaves, but always as cautionary tales about dangerous ideas. Master Beaumont had a daughter, Samuel continued. Elizabeth. She was educated too, but by a governess, the way proper young ladies are taught. We grew up in the same house. I was 2 years older. And as we grew, we became friends, reading the same books, discussing the same ideas. By the time I was 17 and she was 15, we were in love. No. Margaret's voice was sharp. Don't tell me this. You asked for truth, ma'am. Elizabeth Beaumont loved me, and I loved her. We knew it was impossible. We knew the world would never accept it. But young love doesn't care about the world's rules. What happened? When Elizabeth turned 18, her father arranged a marriage. A wealthy planter's son from South Carolina. Elizabeth refused, told her father she loved someone else. He demanded to know who. She told him. Margaret could imagine the explosion that followed. A master's daughter in love with a slave, the ultimate transgression, the thing that haunted every slaveholder's nightmares. Master Beaumont should have sold me immediately, should have whipped me within an inch of my life and sent me to the deep south. Instead, he did something worse. He decided to cure his daughter of her delusion by showing her the reality of what I was. He married me to another slave, a woman named Rose who worked in the kitchen. Married? Slaves can't legally marry. No, ma'am, but many masters allow it anyway. Slave marriages, jumping the broom they call it. It encourages reproduction, creates family ties that make running away less likely. Master Beaumont forced me to marry Rose in front of the entire household. Made Elizabeth watch. Then he gave Rose and me a cabin and ordered us to produce children. The cruelty of it made Margaret's stomach turn. Rose was a good woman, kind, patient. She didn't want the marriage either. She'd loved someone else who'd been sold away years before. But neither of us had a choice. We lived together in that cabin for a year. We were friends, nothing more. I couldn't give her what Master Beaumont wanted because my heart belonged to someone else. Elizabeth, who I saw every day in the main house. Who looked at me with eyes full of pain, whose father watched us both like a hawk, waiting for his experiment to work, waiting for me to forget her and accept my place. This is madness. It gets worse, ma'am. After a year with no children, Master Beaumont decided Rose was barren. He sold her to a plantation in Georgia. Just like that, she was gone. My wife, my friend, the innocent woman caught in this insanity, sold away like furniture. Samuel's voice broke. Then 3 weeks ago, we received news. Rose had died in childbirth in Georgia. The child died too. Turned out she wasn't barren after all. She'd gotten pregnant by another man at the Georgia plantation, probably forced. And she died bringing that child into the world. And you blamed Master Beaumont. I blamed him for all of it, for creating this situation, for tearing apart lives to prove some philosophical point, for selling Rose to her death. I waited until he was alone in his study, walked in with a fireplace poker and tried to kill him. But you failed. His son heard the commotion and stopped me. I'd already hit Master Beaumont twice, cracked his skull. He lived barely. They chained me up in the barn while they decided what to do. By rights, I should have been hanged. But Master Beaumont, even half dead, couldn't bring himself to do it. His grand experiment had produced this, a slave educated enough to feel the full weight of injustice, to act on philosophical principles of right and wrong. He'd created what he feared, a slave who thought like a free man. So he sold you. Sold me with instructions to the traders. Get rid of him quietly. No questions asked, no record of why, just make him disappear into the deep south where educated slaves are dangerous and usually work to death quickly. Margaret sat in silence, processing this story that couldn't be true but rang with too much specific detail to be fabricated. And Elizabeth? I don't know. I was gone before I could find out. Probably married off to that South Carolina planter. Probably spending her life wondering what happened to me. Probably dying inside the way I'm dying inside. You're not dead. No, ma'am. But I'm not alive either. I'm a ghost. A thing that looks human but isn't anymore. You paid $8.50 for a ghost. The next morning, Margaret should have resolved Samuel, should have cut her losses and found a different slave who didn't come with this tragic, complicated history. But she didn't. Something about his story, about the waste and cruelty of it, made her angry in ways she didn't fully understand. She took Samuel back to her plantation in the backcountry. The other slaves eyed him suspiciously at first. New slaves were always dangerous unknowns. But Samuel kept to himself, worked when told to work, and showed no sign of rebellion. Moved through days like a man underwater, functional but not present. Margaret watched him. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps because his story had cracked something in her own carefully constructed worldview. Her husband had told her slaves were content in their condition, that they lacked the capacity for higher feelings. Samuel was living proof that was a lie. One evening, 2 weeks after bringing him home, she found Samuel sitting by the slave quarters at dusk, staring at nothing. "Can you really read Greek and Latin?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Prove it." She'd brought a book from her husband's library, one of the few impressive volumes Thomas had owned, probably for show. Homer's Odyssey in the original Greek. She handed it to Samuel. He looked at it for a long moment, then began to read aloud. The ancient words flowed from his mouth like music, perfectly pronounced, with understanding of rhythm and meaning. After a few lines, he switched to English, translating as he went. "Tell me about suffering, muse. Tell me of the man of many ways, driven tongue." And again, of course, once he had plucked the hallowed heights of Troy. Margaret felt tears in her eyes. This young man, this person she'd bought for $8.50, was more educated than most white men she knew, could read ancient languages, could translate poetry, could think and feel and love. "Why did Master Beaumont do it?" she asked. "Why educate you if he never intended to free you?" "Because he believed in the experiment more than he believed in me. I was a test subject. Proof that even with education, a slave would remain inferior to whites. When I didn't remain inferior, when I developed fully human emotions and desires and principles, the experiment failed. And he couldn't admit it failed because that would mean admitting slavery itself might be wrong. Is it wrong?" Samuel looked at her. "Ma'am, you're asking a slave if slavery is wrong. What answer do you expect?" "An honest one." "Then, yes, it's wrong. Not just cruel or inefficient or unfortunate, fundamentally, morally, absolutely wrong. Every principle Master Beaumont taught me, every philosopher I read, every logical argument I can construct leads to that conclusion. Slavery is theft of life itself." Margaret should have been furious. Should have had him whipped for such talk. Instead, she asked, "What would you do if you were free?" "Find Elizabeth. Tell her what happened. Ask if she still remembers me, and if she does, try to build whatever life we could together. Even if the entire world stood against us, that's impossible. Most worthwhile things are." Over the following months, Margaret watched Samuel slowly come back to life. The emptiness in his eyes faded, replaced by carefully controlled sadness. He worked her fields competently, taught some of the other slaves to read in secret after Margaret looked the other way, and occasionally, in the evenings, would sit on her porch and discuss philosophy with her. These conversations were inappropriate, scandalous even. A widow and a slave, talking about Plato and Aristotle, about freedom and morality and the nature of the soul. If her neighbors knew, they'd have been horrified. But Margaret found herself looking forward to these evenings. Her husband had never engaged her mind. Samuel did. One night in December, Margaret made a decision. "I'm going to free you." Samuel looked at her in shock. "Ma'am, not immediately. It's complicated. Virginia has laws about manumission. You have to petition the court, prove the slave has performed some exceptional service. It'll take time. But I'm going to start the process. You shouldn't be enslaved." "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because I've spent these months listening to you, watching you. And I've come to believe you're right. Not about all of slavery, I'm not that radical. But about you specifically. You're wasted in bondage. You should be free to find your Elizabeth, to live whatever life you can build. She's married by now, to that South Carolina planter, maybe. But you'll never know unless you're free to look." The legal process began in January 1860. Margaret petitioned the court, claiming Samuel had saved her from a runaway horse, an invention but one that couldn't be easily disproven. The county was skeptical. Freeing slaves created free black people, who were seen as dangerous examples to those still enslaved. But Margaret was persistent, spending money she didn't have on lawyers and court fees. While waiting for the legal machinery to grind forward, Samuel asked Margaret a question. "If I'm freed, will you come with me to find Elizabeth?" "What? Why would I do that?" "Because if I show up alone at a South Carolina plantation looking for a white woman I claim to love, I'll be killed before I can speak 10 words. But if I arrive with a white widow who vouches for me, says I'm her free employee sent to deliver a message, I might get through the door." It was audacious and probably suicidal, but Margaret found herself agreeing. The Freedom Papers came through in June 1860. Samuel Freeman, as he now called himself, was legally free. A black man in a world that didn't want free black men, but free nonetheless. And Margaret Ashford, widow, made arrangements to travel to South Carolina with her former slave to find the woman he loved. They reached the plantation on a sweltering July afternoon. Oak trees, draped with Spanish moss, lined the drive to a house even more impressive than Beaumont Hall. Margaret's heart sank. Elizabeth had married into serious wealth. Why would she remember a slave from her youth? The butler who answered the door looked at Samuel with immediate suspicion, but Margaret's presence forestalled any violence. She presented her card and requested an audience with Mrs. Elizabeth Crawford, wife of the plantation owner. They were shown to a sitting room. Margaret's hands shook. This was madness. They should leave before Elizabeth entered. She was beautiful, late 20s now, dressed in expensive silk, every inch the plantation. Mistress, her eyes swept the room, passed over Margaret, landed on Samuel, and froze. "God in heaven," she whispered. "Samuel?" He stood. "Elizabeth, they told me you were dead. Father said you'd been hanged for attacking him. I mourned you for a year. I was sold. Your father couldn't bring himself to kill me, so he sent me south to die slowly instead." Elizabeth turned to Margaret. "Who are you?" "Margaret Ashford. I bought Samuel at auction in Charleston for $8.50. Elizabeth's face went white. $8? They valued you at $8. 17 cents on the dollar, actually, Samuel said. I wasn't worth much by then. I should have fought harder. Elizabeth was crying now. Should have refused the marriage more forcefully. Should have. You were 18 years old and owned by your father as surely as I was owned by him, Samuel said gently. There was nothing you could have done. I married Crawford. Father arranged it 3 months after you disappeared. I've hated every day since. Born 2 children I barely feel connected to. Lived in this prison pretending to be happy. Margaret cleared her throat. Mrs. Crawford, I came here to tell you that Samuel is free now. I manumitted him. He wanted you to know he survived. That he kept his promise to remember you. Elizabeth looked at Samuel with eyes full of pain and longing and impossible hope. You're free? Yes. And you came here to tell me. To ask if I still love you. God, Samuel, yes, I've loved you every single day, every single moment. Even when I thought you were dead, I loved you. Then come with me. The words hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. I can't, Elizabeth whispered. I have children, a husband, a position in society. My father would hunt us down. Crawford would kill you. The law would, I know, Samuel said. I know all the reasons it's impossible. But I came here to ask anyway, because I made a promise to myself that if I ever got free, I would find you and tell you the truth. I love you. I have always loved you. And if you'll walk out that door with me right now, we'll run so far into the north that no one will ever find us. Margaret held her breath. This was insanity. Elizabeth would never. Yes. The single word changed everything. Yes, Elizabeth repeated, stronger now. I'll come with you. I don't know how, I don't know where we'll go, but yes. What followed was a frantic hour of planning. Elizabeth couldn't just disappear. Her husband would raise alarms immediately. They needed time. Margaret suggested a story. Elizabeth would claim she needed to visit a sick relative in Charleston, would take Margaret's carriage, and once away from the plantation would simply keep going. It was weak, but it was something. Elizabeth packed a small bag, kissed her sleeping children goodbye with tears streaming down her face, left a note for her husband claiming sudden urgent family business, and climbed into Margaret's carriage with Samuel and Margaret. They drove through the night, changing horses twice, heading north through the Carolinas toward Virginia and then beyond, toward states where slavery was illegal, and a mixed couple might survive if they were careful. Margaret traveled with them for 3 days before turning back. On the morning they parted ways at an inn in southern Virginia, Elizabeth embraced her. Why did you do this? Elizabeth asked. You could hang for helping me leave my husband. Could be arrested for aiding a fugitive wife. Because I listened to Samuel's story and realized I'd spent my whole life believing lies. And because love like yours shouldn't be destroyed by laws made by cruel men, Margaret returned to her plantation, sold it the following year, and moved to Richmond, where she lived quietly until her death in 1878. She never saw Samuel or Elizabeth again, but she received one letter, posted from somewhere in Canada. No return address. Dear Mrs. Ashford, we are alive. We are together. We are free. Thank you for giving us the impossible. With eternal gratitude, Samuel and Elizabeth Freeman. The Civil War came. Slavery ended. And somewhere in the chaos of history, a young man who'd been bought for $8.50 lived out his life with the woman he loved. The widow who'd purchased him never imagined who he'd been married to, not in the legal sense, but in the truest sense. Married in the way that matters most, in the heart. This is their story. The story of three people who defied everything to honor love over law, humanity over custom, and conscience over conformity.